healthcare, there is often too much information and not enough time. Here at the Melanin Initiative, we avoid TMI by breaking things down into language you can understand. We create a safe space for you to ask your questions and share a nursing perspective without taking up too much of your time. Today, our special guest is Tiffany Lewis-English, another nurse, and she's been so kind to share her expertise in nursing as a patient as well as an entrepreneur. She'll be joining us for 2 episodes. In this first episode, we'll do a deep dive into endometriosis and infertility. We'll learn about both her nursing and doula journey. She'll tell us what her history was like when it came to getting diagnosed with endometriosis. We'll address misconceptions when it comes to infertility. And she'll tell us about that journey, which we really are so grateful for her transparency and her vulnerability. And then we'll talk about the costs as well as adoption. If you're new here, welcome to the Melanin Initiative. I'm Dr. Kimberly Madison, and I'm joined by Alicia Brown, our virtual nurse expert. We co-host this show along with Geraldine, who sends her love in her absence. We are a health literacy podcast. When we say health literacy, we're talking about your ability to obtain information, to understand that information, and then to use it to manage your health and advocate for others. It's our hope that by watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and soon Facebook, or listening on any of your favorite podcast apps, that you'll be encouraged to ask questions, empowered on how you can navigate the system, and educated on how you can advocate for yourself and others. If you haven't already, this is your chance to subscribe, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment or two. It lets the algorithm know that information like this is important so that when people like you look for information like this, we show up higher in their search results. Remember, this show is for educational purposes only. The opinions expressed here are opinions alone. They are not a representation of any of our affiliations. If you think you might be having a medical emergency, you should seek medical attention and medical guidance from your healthcare provider. If you think you might be having a physical emergency, you should call 911. And if you or someone you know might be having a mental health emergency, you can call 988 or text 741-741. Welcome to the Melanin Initiative, Tiffany.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for just this platform that you have created for healthcare professionals to be able to share our life journey as well as our nursing aspects. So thank you both so much for having me today.
Yes, thank you, and welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Were you going to say something, Kimberly? No? Okay. All righty, so let's dive right in. Tiffany, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your nursing journey and your doula journey?
Okay, so I have been a licensed practical nurse for 10 years this month. I have a background in dementia. Geriatrics is like my ultimate favorite. For the last 4 years, I have worked in mental health along with COVID, just the aspects of how COVID can affect the mental health, working at a mental health hospital. And I have been a birth and fertility doula for the last 4.5 years. I have attended multiple births, but my passion is really the fertility doula portion, because once you hear the word fertility, sometimes you just don't understand the background of it. And so my aspect as a fertility doula, I let you know that there's options. I assist you on your journey, whether you want to conceive naturally through diet and exercise, or if you would like for me to assist you on your journey of finding a fertility doctor and walking you through. So there's just so many different ways of conceiving. And so my job is to just allow you support and comfort all while doing this.
Awesome. How would you say that your nursing experience and journey has helped to shape your doula experience?
So from the nursing perspective, I can understand where providers come from when you are trying to conceive or when you are getting ready to give birth. But then as a doula, I can come in with that knowledge of what a doctor or what a nurse may be thinking, but I can give you this holistic health. And it's like I can be the medium between the patient and the provider.
I love that. I often think of nursing in general as being the mediator between,
Yes.
The patient and the physician. So that's lovely. Thank you. All right. So let's dive in a little bit about your endometriosis story. Could you share with us how you first got diagnosed with endometriosis?
Sure. Back in July of 2017, 5 months before I was to get married, I was having just a really bad menstrual cycle. So I thought I went to a local hospital. I was in the emergency room for about 7 hours. No one came to see me. No one placed an IV. I was literally doubled over in pain. I mean, I had dealt with this for years, literally since about 16. I had bad menstrual cycles where I was in the emergency department every month complaining of this pain. And it was simply told that I was having just a bad menstrual cycle. I would get IV fluids and sent home with naproxen and, tell me to rest. On this particular night, I just couldn't take it anymore. I went back home. And my OB doctor called the next day and said, hey, we got a report that you were in emergency. Are you feeling better? I expressed to her that I had left. I was never seen. And so she gave me an appointment to come in and be seen. They sent me for an ultrasound, and the doctor walked back in and she looked at me and my then fiance and said, I'm not sure what your plans are for parenthood, but you guys need to discuss it quickly because you're being admitted and we're taking you in for emergency surgery. From the ultrasound, they saw that there was a cyst on the top of my left ovary that was triple the size of my ovary, and they were going to go in and remove the cyst with the thought of the ovary may have to go as well. About 3 a.m., the doctor came in and she said, I have good news and bad news. The good news is we were able to save your ovary. The bad news is that you have stage 4 endometriosis and infertility. And she gave me a packet and walked out the room. And even though I had been a nurse for years, endometriosis was something that I had never even heard of. And infertility was something that I thought just didn't happen to African Americans. Like, I felt like if you saw a woman that didn't have a baby, it's just because she decided not to, not because she couldn't. And so I was left sitting in this hospital room with my fiance snoring, and I'm trying to figure out, where do I go from here? I was given a packet of fertility specialists and just left to sit with just not knowing, no knowledge. And so that is how I received my diagnosis.
Wow. That's a lot to take in, one, not knowing, not being too familiar with what endometriosis is, and kind of just being handed a packet and saying, like, here, read up and figure out what the rest of your life is going to look like, right? Mm-hmm. So in that aspect, what treatment options were given to you, and what did you consider for endometriosis? And for others who may be experiencing endometriosis, what treatment options could be available to them that you are aware of?
Honestly, I don't feel like I was really given a treatment option for my endometriosis. I believe that, and because I had a lack of knowledge going into seeing a fertility specialist, like, that is their goal, right? That is their job, is to make sure if you want to get pregnant, to give you the opportunity to try. So versus treating my endometriosis, we jumped just full-fledged into, we need to try to have a baby. Not knowing that there were other ways to treat endometriosis than just strictly going into wanting to have a baby. And by the time I was able to receive treatment for my endometriosis, it was kind of too late, because when we went in to do an exploratory surgery to try to remove some of the scar tissue, I ended up losing both of my fallopian tubes because the endometriosis had completely taken over. And then even after having both of my fallopian tubes removed, we went in again and suggest, okay, now it's very, like primary that we get your at least eggs out or something to that nature. So we more so treated me wanting to be a mother and not treating the endometriosis. And now it has spread to my bowel, my bladder, my hips. And so basically the only treatment that is recommended is a hysterectomy. And I find that when you have stage 4 endometriosis, I have clients who have come to me and are like, oh, I went and saw a doctor and they're just suggesting a hysterectomy. And so from my point of view, there really is no treatment for endometriosis that a provider will give for you. But just from my own research, I have learned that, dieting is very important. Sugars are terrible for endometriosis. Red meat is terrible for endometriosis. So I've learned to just adjust my eating style to be able to feel better in my body. But there's not a lot of treatment around, maybe a steroid to stop your cycle from coming every month. But, that in its own way has its effects on your body. And so the most treatment that I was ever offered was the fertility treatment and then a hysterectomy.
Did those lifestyle changes make a difference in your symptoms at stage 4?
They actually did. And I told myself in the beginning, like, I can't see how me eating more green leafy vegetables is going to help. But with endometriosis, like I have something called endo fatigue. So I'm always tired no matter how much rest I get. But then I saw like taking my vitamins and eating more vegetables. I was like, oh, I feel great. I have energy. Even when I was to get a menstrual cycle, the pain wasn't as bad, especially when I cut out like the majority of red meat. Now, I will slip up sometimes and have a steak or something, but avoiding it as much as possible, like maybe limit it to once a month. I now am off the steroid and I get a cycle every month. And it's like, okay, maybe this is what a normal cycle feels like, because prior to, I only experienced being bedridden for the first 3 days, having the nausea and vomiting. And so the lifestyle changes have definitely helped with the pain that I feel, the energy that I have. And I even had my fertility doctor tell me a couple of months ago, and she's like, it's so weird. This look like your uterus is aging backwards. And I'm like, that comes from that diet change. So I do personally feel that the diet change has helped me be able to control and tolerate my endometriosis a little bit better.
Was that an oral steroid?
Yes.
And when you talk to your doctor about these lifestyle changes, how does that conversation go?
Of course, it's still encouraging me to keep the steroid on file, as needed. It's encouraged to still take it, but then it's also, recommended that I do what makes me feel best. And so the diet changes and exercises, I was introduced to like a pelvic floor therapist. And so that has helped to like, strengthen the lower half of my body. Even working on my posture of, sitting upright. I have terrible back pain. And so just going into physical therapy has helped a lot. And so it is encouraged, not as much as, saying the steroid will help. It stops my cycle, which stops the growth of the endometriosis. But just for my own personal reasonings, I'd rather just kind of steer away from the steroid and do it on a holistic level per se.
How long do you go to physical therapy?
I go 3 times a week for an hour and a half.
Is that like for the rest of your life, or?
It's just for this time being now, I guess. I see my physical therapist again next week. And so usually we go like by week, but because endometriosis is a chronic illness that never goes away, it probably will be something that I will do for the rest of my life. Because I do feel like when I miss a week where I, am not so consistent, I instantly feel like, oh, I'm having this pain again that I don't feel when I'm exercising and when I'm stretching and when I'm at therapy. And I do use a lot of acupuncture too, just for my own sake. It relaxes me after therapy, and it's just something that I have found comfort in.
Where do they put your needles?
So I get needles like around my neck area and behind my ears because I do have terrible migraines. But then they more so just do them like right around my belly and then the bottom of my feet and in my wrist.
And you mentioned some of the symptoms. Are there any other symptoms someone who might think they might be having endometriosis might be experiencing?
Just the chronic back pain. Like the back pain is something that I have found to be consistent with a lot of the patients that I talk to. Of course, the bad menstrual cycles, really, really heavy bleeding, really bad cramping during intercourse, being uncomfortable, and just the fatigue are some of the things that I have just found to be kind of across the board with a lot of people that I speak with. I did actually have a conversation with someone recently who told me that they had endometriosis that was attached to their lung, and they had a lung collapse. And that was something that I had never, heard of before. And so I was telling myself, like, stop, don't say you got chest pain. Like, this is not happening to you. But there's just so many different signs and symptoms of endo that it's just like, if you feel something, just get checked out.
Along those lines, I was going to ask you, I think you mentioned when you went to the emergency department, at that time, they had diagnosed you with stage 4 endometriosis. Were there any signs and symptoms, kind of thinking back, that perhaps maybe when you were maybe in stage 1 or stage 2 or stage 3, that there were some symptoms that you were probably ignoring? Because we all ignore, those normal aches and pains of life. And you're like, that probably was some endometriosis, and I just didn't think of it that way because I was thinking of a normal menstrual cycle pain. So from your experience, when you look back, do you think you were experiencing some symptoms back then and you just didn't recognize that as endometriosis until it got to stage 4 and it was really bad?
Yes, I definitely do. Like I said, I started having heavy menstrual cycles at the age of 16. But then by the age of 25, they were like, oh, honey, no, like literally I need to be admitted in an IV run, like in my mind. But I saw the change between the ages of 16 and 25. And then, of course, 35 when I was actually diagnosed. And I'm just like, okay, it was never this bad. Like, it has progressed to this. I actually I spoke at an endo conference in Virginia back in July. And I had a young woman come up to me after, and she was like, oh my God, like when you were telling your story about what you felt, she was like, I linked over to my mom, like, this lady is describing exactly what I feel. She's like, but every time I go to the doctor, they say like that I am, just having a bad cycle. Like, and she's like, and I didn't even know what to call it. She's like, but now like that you're describing it, like, what do I go back to the doctor and say? And I'm like, ask them to do an exploratory surgery to see if you have endometriosis. I'm like, because there's really no other way to diagnose it. But if you're feeling all these things, ask. It's okay to ask for an exploratory surgery. But I do feel like, and she even said, like, when I first got my cycle, it was like normal. And then over the years, it's just like it got worse and I couldn't understand it and I couldn't really explain what I was feeling. And I think that is the same thing with me, because endometriosis was nothing that I had ever heard of. It was just like, oh, this cycle is bad this month, but I definitely saw the change. And then I also noticed like my hair started to fall out. And so I didn't know until well into my diagnosis that some of the side effects can be hair loss, weight gain, dropping in weight. And so there was just so much that I'm like, oh, when my hair was falling out in chunks, I'm thinking I'm just stressed. And maybe this is like, was a part of the earlier, signs of the endometriosis. So I definitely saw signs that I didn't know were signs.
It's very interesting. I think we're going to shift gears just a little bit, but
can I pop in?
Yes.
Is there any genetic history? Anyone else in your family have bad, the women on my mom's side, we all have bad periods?
No, but here's the thing though, because you know how like we grew up, we don't really talk a lot like with my grandma's sisters and things of that nature, right? So my grandmother, my maternal grandmother has 2 sisters who never had children. And so it was just like, okay, they didn't have children. They were both school teachers, very successful, and we just didn't discuss it. And then my one aunt, she actually just passed away a couple months ago, but about a year ago, she said to me, like, I kind of almost feel like maybe endometriosis is something that I had, just back then we didn't know what to call it. And because we didn't have the knowledge, I never pushed, the issue to find out more. So I believe that may have been the case in regards to the endometriosis and then result in infertility, but it hasn't really been like confirmed. But I do believe that. And then they said, oh, it skips a generation. And so, of course, that was my grandmother's 2 sisters. And then my grandmother had 4 girls and they all had kids. And then here's my generation. And I'm the one that's kind of like, hey, just out here fighting these diseases.
And that's a trend we see in our culture, right? Because we don't have that history, then we don't know what to look for.
Right.
Talked about the access issues, and then the lack of awareness. And my last question, when you were between 16 and 25, did they recommend just like birth control for those heavy periods?
Yep. I have been on birth control since I was 16 years old.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, of course,
yeah.
Yep. And so, of course, now that I'm looking back on it, I'm like, oh, did birth control like just kind of mask it a little bit? Because I did notice, like, when I was taking a birth control pill on regular, it was like, oh, okay, I'm having a little cramping, but it was like still doable versus when I was off the birth control. And I'm like, oh, this is a whole different, ball game. This cycle is definitely different. And so I just wondered if, like, just when you know better, you do better. Now that I know, I try to help other women advocate. But yes, birth control has been like my best friend since I was 16.
So something that is often linked with endometriosis is infertility. So let's talk a little bit about the misconceptions of infertility.
Okay. So like I said, for one, just infertility was nothing that like we ever discussed growing up. When I got my diagnosis, once again, I thought it was just like, if you saw a woman who didn't have a baby, it's just because she didn't want one. And then when I got the knowledge of infertility and knowing that you can do, IVF or IUI, I still just thought like, oh no, this is for like rich people who don't want to mess up their bodies. Like they get their eggs pulled, they use a surrogate, not knowing that like, this is what infertility is. This is for people who just can't have babies. And so as I thought like, okay, infertility is costing me motherhood, possibly. It also cost me in mental. I would have days where it was like, I really wanted to like shut out the outside world. And of course, I have a huge faith in God, right? And I believe that nothing happens without him allowing it to happen. But then I also was human. And so I had those moments where it was just like, but God, why me? And so I wanted to isolate myself from other people who were, say things like, oh, just adopt, or just, oh, if I blink my eyes, I'm pregnant. And so I found myself just wanting to be completely alone. Like I would work and come home, and then it was like I would shut down. And so not only did it mess up my mental, but then there was a time in my marriage where it was like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore because I can't, give you children. I don't want to look at you. And so let's just go our separate ways. And so at one point, my husband and I separated because I just felt like, this diagnosis made me incapable of really fulfilling my duties as a wife. And even though the only portion was a baby, I took it, way further, it's just something that I don't want to do. I didn't want to cook. I didn't want to clean. I didn't want to be intimate. And so that wasn't fair to him. And I was just like, let's just call it quits. Let's just, go our separate ways. It costs you basically your life. I have missed out on important things. One of my friends turned 35 and we were going to Turks and Caicos. And I'm like, no. I'm going to, prepare for a round of IVF. I'm not going to be able to go. And then when it failed, it was like, I've missed out on travel. I've missed out on, just life, because everything in my life was built around ways of coping with infertility, trying to figure out how to be a mother, and isolating myself. And so it cost me, it cost me life. And not only life, but then when my husband and I did decide, okay, we're going to do IVF, it cost us our savings. And then when that didn't work, then now you're taking loans out and you're trying to rebuild to do it all over again. And so And it took away from just the intimacy of, just being married. We got our diagnosis 5 months before we got married. So literally this baggage was attached to us. And we didn't know what it felt like to just enjoy being married, because everything was centered around, I would eat, sleep, drink my infertility. Like I would get into bed and he wanted to cuddle. And I'm like, oh, babe, look at this book that I found about infertility. And so it costs you so much more than just finances. It causes you to lose out on a lot.
So I have a couple of questions. So my first question is, how do you overcome, that mental warfare that's surrounded by infertility? How did you cope with all of this?
So like I said earlier, like I have a very strong faith base with God. And so during one of these stages of isolation, I found myself just crying out to God, like, listen, I know you didn't bring me here to leave me. Like, so what are you trying to get through me? What are you trying to get my attention for? And so he gave me this heal her, right? And I was like, oh, yes, God, that's right up my alley. I'm going to help heal other women. And he's like, no, you have to heal her. There's so much that I had bottled up inside. There was so much that I just hid. Like, I could have literally been like, your ovaries are going to be taken tomorrow, and I'm going to take that diagnosis, and then tomorrow I'm going to show up as if I've never received it. And so I needed to sit with that, right? It wasn't saying like that I didn't trust God, but I needed to sit with my diagnosis. I needed to know that it was okay to not be okay, but that I needed to release it. And so God gave me this vision, Hannah's Heart Fertility, which allowed me to be able to help other families who had received the same diagnosis, because nothing that he gives us is ever just for ourselves. And so in order for me to be able to try to help assist or heal other women, I needed to heal myself first. And so I just went on a complete healing journey, and it was ugly. It was ugly. I cut my hair off. I went completely natural because, like I said, with the endometriosis, I started losing my hair. And so I just cut my hair off completely, and I allowed God to just literally restore me from all of the things that I felt that I had lost, from all of the things that I felt like I was incapable of having. I allowed him to just completely do a restoration and a revival on me. And when I came out, and let me tell you, and it was 6 months. Okay. I thought it was going to be something quick. Okay, God, you're going to heal me a good 30 days. No, it was a good long 6 months. But when I came out of it, I literally felt like I came out ready to conquer the world. It was really like a peace that surpasses all understanding type of transition that took place for me. But had I not allowed God to come in that time of isolation, I probably never would have been able to heal.
Wow. So for our audience, Tiffany is going to give us a rundown on Hannah's Heart Fertility in another episode. So tune in to that episode to hear all about that. Another question I had for you, Tiffany, is did you ever seek therapy or mentorship or support from other women who were also experiencing infertility?
I did. So the very first support group that my husband and I walked in, there was no one in the room that looks like us. And they didn't have the money issues that, we had. And so it was uncomfortable for me. And so I'm like, okay, well, this isn't the area for us. And so then I just went into private therapy. I dealt with a mental health therapist just to deal with the mental portion. And then I also saw a specialist, a therapist who dealt with just infertility alone. And my mental health therapist allowed me to be completely transparent about the pain of the endometriosis that I felt. And then my fertility therapist was able to, just kind of guide me through the fertility portion. And I still see both of them. I believe in God, but I also believe that he has put people in place to help here on earth. And so I am a huge advocate of therapy. And so at the time, there weren't like a lot of mentors per se to help guide you through the journey of fertility. So I didn't have that opportunity, but my one therapist was like amazing. She was on point with making sure that everything that I needed to, feel as far as my fertility was concerned, that she was available for me. And so she kind of was a mentor in a way. But therapy was just, it worked for me.
That is awesome, Tiffany. And I think it's important just to shout out that, finding people that support us in the different areas of our life that we need help. So that, having someone that was there for the mental aspect, and then finding that guidance for the infertility piece, and the doctor to help to treat the endometriosis, they all played a part in moving you forward in your journey. So the next part that I would like for you to share with us is exactly what treatment options or treatments have you gone through to help overcome infertility?
So the only treatments that I have had were IVF. Like I said, I lost both of my fallopian tubes, so IUI was never an option for us. But I have gone through multiple rounds of IVF, which none of them have been successful. For one, I am almost 42. So my egg reserve is like, a lot lower than someone who was maybe 25 or 30. The endometriosis is on the outside of my uterus. And so that causes some issues with the IVF, but those are the only treatments so far that I have dealt with in regards to overcoming my infertility. And because I just have, so much faith in God, I feel like this is it for me. This is it for me. I will be more of help to others to assist them on their journey. IVF is a whole mental war of its own. Not only are you injecting yourselves with hormones, multiple times a day, you're literally preparing your heart and your mind for something that you just don't know if it's going to happen, right? It's not a guarantee. It's not promised to us. And so mentally, you're battling with, do I get excited that this is the time? But then I also need to be realistic that, it may not be. And so just mentally, it takes a toll on you.
I'm curious, you mentioned steroids, exploratory surgery, the pelvic floor physical therapist, the 2 mental health therapists, and IVF. Is insurance covering all of that?
So, no. Well, so I have never had a nursing job that has covered IVF. The pelvic floor therapy I was able to use insurance for, but everything else we literally had to pay out of pocket. Now, this last recent round of IVF that I just had, I work travel nursing now, and so my agency actually offered the IVF. However, there's always that hidden cost. And so they paid a portion but we still had to come up with a substantial amount of money to cover not only the IVF, but then there were meds that were ordered that the insurance company didn't cover. And the doctor is like not willing to do a generic form. And so you have to come out of pocket with that. And so that alone is also a stress and strain and struggle on your life.
I know a former colleague of mine, she worked at a particular hospital here in the DMV, and it was like $20,000. They got 6 rounds of IVF. And if they didn't get pregnant by the end, they got their money back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm not an expert in the cost.
Right.
I just remember her story.
Yeah. So so with my agency now, we got $50,000 for a total of, I believe, 3 rounds. We did our first with the insurance company, but that isn't our first, round total. But my husband is a 12-year veteran, and even the VA, like they gave us like a $600 stipend towards meds, but the cost here in Rochester, where I am, there's not a lot of jobs that actually help cover the cost.
Wow. The financial burden, definitely drives people's decision on what they're going to do in these situations. Have you ever considered, adoption or surrogacy in your family planning journey?
So years ago, we talked about using a surrogate, but I still wanted to use my own eggs. But because of, my age now and my eggs actually not like maturing and fertilizing, that was not an option for us. We were given the option of donor egg, but donor eggs are absolutely expensive. And so an adoption was just nothing that we had ever considered. It's just something that we never talked about. I'm not sure that it is something that we will go back and revisit because, just as a woman, you want to conceive and carry and birth, your own baby. And not saying that you can't feel the same love through adoption. It's just because we were so gun-ho on God is going to perform this miracle for us. It's just something that we never discussed.
Have you thought about any other fertility treatment options outside of IVF?
No.
All righty. Kimberly, you have any other questions for Tiffany today?
So you were kind enough before we started recording to share with us that you just finished doing one of your most recent IVF treatments. And actually, you've mentioned IVF and IUI.
Mm-hmm.
Just say what the difference is for those and what that stands for.
Okay, so the IUI is insemination. So they would have just taken my husband's sperm and put it through the fallopian tube to connect to the egg. So that's IUI. And then IVF is in vitro fertilization, where they actually pull my eggs out, insert my husband's sperm, and then they watch it over a course of 3 to 5 days in a petri dish to see if it matures and fertilizes.
And so we don't want to, so Tyrese recently has been doing some interviews, and he mentioned, when we talk about infertility, sometimes we only talk about the women's loss and their pain. And so we want to give a few minutes here to attention to your husband and what his journey has been like. You said you did do some therapy together, but I'm just curious what his journey has been like.
So my husband first of all, my husband is a comedian. And so he always tries to find like some way to laugh, right? So whereas I am like, this is so serious, and he's like, babe, laugh. And so he really is the one who helped push me on my healing journey, because when I would like weep and cry and ask God why, my husband literally like rolled over one night and was like, where is your faith? Like, where's your faith? If God brought you to it, he'll bring you through it, right? So where's your faith? Like, you do all this preaching and praying, like, where is that now? And so my husband is like a silent prayer warrior. And so for him, whenever we got like the bad news or we were getting ready to go in for a procedure, I would be like, so what are your thoughts? He'd be like, I already talked to God about it. Like, it is what it is. And I'm like, no. Why don't I have that? Why am I crying and struggling? And he is just like, and like I said, so I mentioned before we started recording that we just recently went through our third round of IVF, and we got the call that our eggs didn't make it to fertilization by day 7. And so there's no way that they can freeze them or place them back in. And so I'm talking to my husband this morning as I'm getting ready for the recording. And I'm just like, babe, I really got to show up. Like, I'm like, how do you feel? And for the first time ever, he said, I'm disappointed. But you know what? I'm going to pray about it. And he's a barber also. So he got his things and he headed out to the barbershop. And I'm just like standing in the bathroom looking in the mirror like, if he's disappointed, then, this was a rough turnaround, because we had so much hope and so much faith. And I told him, like, each round has looked so different, right? And this round just looked so promising. Like the updates that you get about, we call them our M babies. So, your M babies are fighting, and just the constant, hope that, okay, that day 7 is going to be, the call that we're waiting for. And then you don't, and it's just like, so he did do some therapy on his own. But he is just like, he's coped in his own way, but he's also just always shown up to be that protector and comfort for me during the time.
And you're referring to the news you received yesterday?
Yes.
Okay, so for our audience, Tiffany was kind enough to let us know that she just finished one of her, this is the 6th round, right?
Yes.
And that you got unfortunate news yesterday that one was not successful as you had hoped.
Mm-hmm.
And both me and Miss Brown cannot imagine still agreeing to come on this episode and actually talk about the very thing that's pulling at your heart right now. So we want to thank you for doing that. We know that the time you've spent not only with Hannah's Heart, but even today with us, sharing your journey at such a vulnerable time is going to have an impact on people. And we both believe that God puts us through things, not just for our own benefit, so that we can turn around and help someone else.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been our pleasure. Anything else you want to say, Alicia? Any word? Oh, so how can people connect with you?
So I have a group on Facebook called Hannah's Heart Fertility Support Group. And then on Instagram, it is Hannah's Heart Fertility, LLC.
And we'll have all those links in the description box. And of course, you'll be back on to go all in depth on Hannah's Heart. And that episode is going to air at a special time on a special date. Do you want to just tell our audience about that?
Yes, so that episode will air on Tuesday, October the 15th, which is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day. It is a day where worldwide from 7 to 8, families who have experienced pregnancy or infant loss light a candle worldwide just to honor our babies that are no longer with us.
So make sure you follow, like, and subscribe so you can tune in for that special episode. We thank you so much, Tiffany, for taking your time with us and for sharing your story. Remember, everyone, you can email us your questions and show ideas at tmi.melanin@gmail.com. If you haven't already, you still have time to subscribe, leave a comment, share with your friends and your family on every social media platform. Leave a hello in the comments when you get there. It lets the algorithm know that this information is important so that when people like you look for information like this, we show up higher in the search results. All the information we talked about today and any resources will be linked below. We, at the time of this filming, release new episodes weekly on Sundays at 12 noon Eastern on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, soon Facebook. We need your help to get to 100 followers so we can be on Facebook Live and on all your favorite podcast apps. We release the podcast at 5 a.m. so that our night shifters can be the first to get something and not the last. And so our day shifters have something to listen to before they start, and perhaps maybe someone watches it during huddle. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll see you next time.